Check. Good evening, one and all. On behalf of the Center for Public Policy and Governance, it is my pleasure to welcome all our distinguished guests, esteemed representatives from various institutions, organizations, agencies, and our dedicated audience, both here in person and online, to join us for today's talk and discussion on Great Game to Gate Goal, fast-tracking trade and connectivity in Eastern South Asia. On behalf of the CPPG, I also extend a warm welcome to Professor Imran Rahman, Vice Chancellor of the University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh, who's joining us online. Welcome, sir. To Professor Sudeep Chakravarti, Director, CSASU Lab, and the keynote speaker for today's event. A warm welcome also to our Director, Professor Ajit Parulekar. A warm welcome to Dr. Pushkar, Director, ICG as well. We are indeed honored to have you all with us for the first collaboration between the Goa Institute of Management and the ULab. Thank you all for being here. May I kindly request the dignitaries to please take their seats on the dais. Professor Chakravarti, Professor Ajit Parulekar, Dr. Pushkar, Professor Sebastian Morris, Chair CPPG, and Professor Kinshuk Sarkar, Member CPPG, who have been leading this initiative and who have made this possible. Kindly do take your seats on the dais. Thank you. This evening, we gather to delve into a topic of immense importance. As we navigate the complexities of global trade and regional dynamics, the theme of accelerating trade and connectivity in Eastern South Asia stands out as a beacon for economic development and regional cooperation. Professor Chakravarti's insights will shed light on how strategic initiatives can pave the way for a more integrated and prosperous future for the region. We look forward to a thought-provoking and enriching discussion. Without further ado, I request Dr. Pushkar, Director ICG, to say a few words. Before that, I will very briefly introduce Dr. Pushkar. Dr. Pushkar is Director and Chief Executive, the International Center Goa since 2016. A PhD in Political Science, McGill University. He previously taught at BITS Pilani, Goa, McGill University, Concordia University, and Goa University. He is a co-author with Madhavi Gupta of Democracy, Civil Society, and Health in India. Dr. Pushkar has also written more than 150 op-eds on India's higher education for Hindustan Times, Indian Express, Times Higher Education, The Wire, and others. We are indeed privileged to have amidst us Dr. Pushkar, and I kindly request you to please say a few words and share your thoughts.
Easier to read. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening on a typically humid day in Goa. And I think we have been sweating, I think, right from sun up, or even before that. Professor Imran Rahman, who's Vice Chancellor of the University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh, thank you for joining us online. Professor Ajit Parulekar, Director of GIM, who is here with us on the stage. Sudeep Chakravarti, Director of the Center for South Asian Studies, University of Liberal Arts. Professor Sebastian Morris, Chair, Center for Public Policy and Governance, GIM. Professor Kinshuk Sarkar. Thank you once again for organizing a program, talk and discussion at ICG. And as I was complaining before, May is a particularly bad time, not just because of the weather, but also because, most people are on vacation. So, it'll be a real challenge for us tomorrow as well when Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal delivers his public lecture. We are hoping for the best. And members of the audience, I believe most of you would be from GIM. Uh, the center has made it its business to try and organize as many academic as well as semi-academic programs. One of the things we have seen in the past 3 years in particular, especially since COVID, is that the physical attendance for most programs, and particularly academic programs, has become a big challenge. So we actually try these days to organize most of our programs during the day, because then we can reach out to colleges, and there is greater interest we have seen among undergraduate students, college students, than among postgraduate students of the university, which is next door. Even in terms of faculty, you're very excited college teachers who would like to listen to Sudeep, for example, but if it's in the evening, it cannot be done. So I'm just suggesting that this is something we could think of the next time. I mean, even something like public policy. I mean, lots of people would be very interested in knowing what exactly public policy is all about, and undergraduate students would really benefit from that. So that is something maybe we could think of. I'll leave it at that, and that's it. Thank you all for coming, and waiting to listen to Professor Chakravarti.
Thank you, Dr. Pushkar. We also have amidst us our director, Professor Ajit Parulekar, and it's my honor to introduce to you our director. Professor Ajit Parulekar is currently the director of the Goa Institute of Management and is a professor of marketing in the healthcare management program. He holds a PhD in marketing and has So I request you to please say a few words at the outset of this collaboration.
Yeah, good evening, Professor Imran, Vice Chancellor of ULAB, friends, Dr. Pushkar, Dr. Sudeep, Professor Morris, Professor Kinshuk, friends in the audience, welcome to kind of equal number of people on the days as compared to the people in the audience. So we'll shift in a couple of minutes there. But the good part of that is going to be that we are going to have a lot more exciting conversation, right? I think, but this is the challenge. This is a challenge that we also face at the Goa Institute of Management. Today, the most difficult thing in events is getting an audience, right? Not getting speakers and putting a great program. And the more deeper the conversation, the more challenging it is. And therefore, I do agree that we'll have to look at strategies of how do we change that. I know online conversations, somehow you get a much larger number of people nowadays, but इसमें मजा कुछ और ही है when you have face-to-face conversations. We are really happy. This is our first collaborative event that we are having with ULAB, and we hope to see a lot more different kinds of collaboration happening with them. I must say that, like a lot of institutions, initially we had a lot of focus on the West, and that's not where most of the happening stuff is happening. So therefore, in the last couple of years, we've consciously chosen that we look at economies where their economies are a lot more interesting economies. It's a difficult task, and I'm saying it's a difficult task because it'll take time till students will see interest in economies like this. So, we did have a couple of students this year so we have a program called as Give Goa Initiative. We no longer can call it Give Goa, because from this year we decided that instead of having this program only focused on Goa, we moved it nationwide, and we also had a group working in Bangladesh. Professor Kinshuk was with a group that worked in Bangladesh. But I can tell you that the eagerness with which students are happy to go to the UK or France or wherever in Western Europe or the US, it's really difficult to get them to go to happening economies like Indonesia, Bangladesh. Israel now has war, but getting to places where there's a lot of new stuff happening, it's a lot more difficult. It'll take a little bit of time, but we are very committed to have those conversations on our campus to make sure that students are able to see what the immediate future is like. So with that context, I'm really glad we're having this conversation today. it's an important conversation for us, and I look forward to that conversation. With that, welcome everyone, and we're just waiting to get to the other side there. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. We also have amidst us online Professor Imran Rahman, who's the Vice Chancellor of ULAB. I'm going to quickly introduce you to him. Professor Imran has been with ULAB since 2006 and held positions of Pro Vice Chancellor, Dean of Business, and Professor of Finance. Before joining ULAB, Professor Imran was a faculty member at the Institute of Business Administration, University of Dhaka for 22 years. Professor Imran is a director of the Foundation for Learning, Teaching and Research, a non-profit which aims to improve the capacity and quality of teaching and research in universities. He is chair of the Board of Trustees of Teach for Bangladesh. He served as an independent director in 2 public limited finance companies. In 1994, he co-founded a merchant bank and led it for 6 years. One of the first professionally set up merchant banks of the country, EVRD was involved in issue management, private portfolio management, private placement, international brokerage, financial advisory, and equity research. He has studied at the London School of Economics, Manchester Business School, and the University of Dhaka. We are indeed much honored and privileged to have amidst us Professor Imran Rahman to join us online. Thank you, sir. I kindly request you to say a few words and share your thoughts on this collaboration and the event.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's good evening from Dhaka, equally humid Dhaka. So Professor Parulekar, who I had the pleasure to meet at the recent MDSA event in Hyderabad, Professor Pushkar, Professor Sebastian Morris, Professor Kingshuk Sharkar, who started this whole collaboration journey, and of course my colleague Sudeep Chakravarti, the keynote speaker. I'm so happy that I'm addressing the first event of the hopefully a long collaboration between ULAB and GIM, and looking forward to Sudeep's talk on trade and connectivity in Eastern South Asia. So the partnership between GIM and ULAB is so important to enhance the knowledge-based skills opportunities for our students and faculty. It is the kind of partnership that we should have started much long ago. As Dr. Parulekar said, that we used to kind of leapfrog over our South Asian neighbors and go and sign MOUs with Europe, North America, etc. And that really hasn't borne much fruit. So over the last 4 or 5 years, actually, we've changed our focus to South Asia and further to the East. And the ULAB was part of this Erasmus Plus project, which connected us with 3 universities of India. And we happily have MOUs with all 3 now. And I also had the privilege to visit University of Calcutta, one of the oldest universities in this region, to sign a MOU a couple of years ago. So, in South Asia, governments and institutions are increasingly realizing the benefit of transnational collaboration in this region, particularly between India, Bangladesh, Nepal. These range from connectivity to trade and investment, from upskilling in modern technologies and management practices to urgently addressing issues of climate change, etc. And, the conversation is strongest in Bangladesh, I'm happy to say. As educators, researchers, and lifelong students, we need to productively engage with this dynamic situation and contribute to productive futures. And if possible, even attempt to force the pace in order to collaboratively bring about this change. GIM is located in the far west of the subcontinent. ULAB is located in the far east, both from regions with long histories of education, culture, and empowerment. And this collaboration, I'm sure, will bring very fruitful outcomes. And I look forward to the collaboration across our different schools and centers of GIM and ULAB really cement this journey that we started. So looking forward to a great talk. My greetings to all the GIM folks in the audience. So thank you so much for having me.
Check. Thank you, sir, for your encouragement and support. We now move to the keynote address, but before that, I'm going to request Professor Sebastian Morris, Chair CPPG, to set the context. I will quickly introduce Professor Morris. Professor Sebastian Morris is Senior Professor and Chair of the Center for Public Policy and Governance at the Goa Institute of Management. He retired from the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, after over 25 years of teaching, research, and consultation. His principal interests are the Indian economy, infrastructure development and regulation, the public sector and governance, international trade and investments, macroeconomics, and small industry. His recent books have been Macroeconomic Policy in India Since the Global Financial Crisis, Trends, Policies, and Challenges in Economic Revival Post-COVID, The Difficulty of Being Gajendra Haldeya, Reflections on His Life and Legacy, The Indian Infrastructure Report 2023, Urban Planning and Development. Sir, could you kindly set the context for today's talk?
Yeah, so thanks, Bernice. And it's an honor to be with all of you all. But let me welcome Professor Imran and Professor Sudeep Chakravarti. And, yeah, so let me just go ahead and, think of this major issue of trade and economic relationship between the countries of South Asia, but more particularly the countries on the eastern side of South Asia. Okay? Yeah, so I'll first start by, saying that I've always been puzzled by trade theory, which argues that regional trade agreements are inferior to, multilateralism. And this has been the position that the WTO and Bhagwati and all the scholars have put in. But to my mind, that there is an incompleteness here. If we break up the business decision into investment decisions and operational decisions, then much of pure trade theory actually only looks at operational decisions. So there is a basis for regional trade agreements, not as a competition to global agreements or multilateralism, but as a region over which firms optimize their investment choices. So in other words, what one is saying, let's say a Tata Motors, if it has a market in Bangladesh or Nepal or Pakistan, may optimize its production and scale based on the access it has to these markets, but may not do so given its markets in faraway countries where the distances may kind of water down the value that it has. So the point that I'm trying to make is that perhaps we need to rethink the optimality of regional trade agreements, because they might be important in investment optimization. I'm hoping that some of these questions in some way would be addressed and recognized by our speaker. To my mind, Assam, Bangladesh, when I look at it as an Indian, the problem with us with the partition was that Calcutta, among many other things, the distance between Calcutta and its very important hinterland, namely Assam, became something in the range of around 8 days. Whereas earlier, through Bangladesh and its waters, Calcutta had access to Assam and to Upper Assam in about 3 days. And a large part of the story of the poverty in eastern India was because of the lack of connect between India and Bangladesh. And I can understand this in the early period, but after 71, we are still not able to get going on that. In fact, somehow the Indian negotiations even to get Bangladesh gas into India has failed, or it has not succeeded as far as I know. Even a simple thing like getting Tripura gas into Bangladesh and Bangladesh gas into India on an exchange basis, where you don't have to face the price issue, has not happened. Okay, there is so much scope to collaborate on energy, transportation, water, land use, agriculture, and most importantly, climate change. Okay. The other thing that I see as having potential is learning from each other on the macroeconomic side. India, after liberalization, kind of veered into a kind of mix of import substitution and laissez-faire. Bangladesh moved into what they call export-oriented growth, but perhaps not the full export-oriented growth that Southeast Asia has built upon, which has been a great success. So I think it's important for us to kind of understand each other and explore the whole transition to development, because South Asia will remain the last bastion of poverty in the world, while East Asia advances and Africa builds on its land abundance. We in South Asia face a future, and unless we can quickly, develop and become really rich, we would be the last bastion of misery in the world. So these are some of the thoughts that arise in my mind. I'm sure, our speaker Sudeep Chakravarti would, pick up some of these or whatever ideas he has in mind and deal with it. So we look forward to hearing from you, and then I'm sure that we'll have a very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We now move to the highlight of today's event. I'm going to quickly introduce Professor Sudeep Chakravarti. Professor Sudeep Chakravarti is the director of the Center for South Asian Studies, at the University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh, where he teaches conflict studies, South Asian literature, ethics, and journalism. He is the author of 10 books that encompass history, ethnography, conflict, and conflict resolution, geopolitics, geoeconomics, and the intersection of democracy and development. These include The Eastern Gate, War and Peace in Nagaland, Manipur, and India's Far East, Plassey, the battle that changed the course of Indian history, The Bengalis, a portrait of a community, Highway 39, and Red Sun. His next book is Fallen City, a psychopolitical narrative set in the 1970s Delhi, to be published in August 2024. He has written nearly 1,000 articles, columns, and essays within the arc of pre-partition to present-day South Asia for major global and South Asian publications, and has for 3 decades advocated conflict resolution and enhanced trade and connectivity in South Asia in general and Eastern South Asia in particular. Sudeep began his career at the Asian Wall Street Journal and subsequently held leadership positions at Sunday, India Today, the India Today Group, and HT Media in a media career spanning 35 years. It's wonderful to have you with us, sir, and we look forward to your keynote address today. I kindly request you, the stage is all yours. Please go ahead.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the honor of inviting the University of Liberal Arts Bangladesh, the Center for South Asian Studies at ULAB, and me personally to Goa. I'm delighted doubly because Goa is home, and to have this opportunity in your home to address people at Goa Institute of Management and other colleagues and friends who are here is indeed a double honor, as I just mentioned. When my, I think, overly generous introduction was being read out, I think you gathered that I'm not much of an academic. I'm actually a practitioner. So I will, in the spirit of full disclosure and the content and the attitude of this evening's presentation. Let me rephrase the introduction and reintroduce myself as actually a professor of practice, as it's called these days. I don't claim to be as learned as the ladies and gentlemen in this room. I am merely a practitioner, and I have been so for several decades. So I dare not call it an address, but my sharing of thoughts with you is where, as far as I would put it, is based on actually several decades of being on the ground in South Asia, in India, Nepal, in Bangladesh, in Bhutan, in Sri Lanka, and briefly in Pakistan and Maldives, and interacting with people there, speaking to them for articles that I had been researching for subsequently for work for my books. Several have become friends. So I've had the privilege, a great privilege of actually interacting with people who are so-called common people, which is a phrase that I abhor, but let me use it to set the tone. People in government, people who are public policy practitioners, people in the bureaucracy, people in business, people in politics, people who are anti-establishment, all manner of people. So I speak to you from this aspect, my sort of lived experience, if you will, as a researcher, writer, and a chronicler. And now, thanks to ULab, an academic as well. So I'm not complaining. In the spirit of a conversation, which I hope this is, let me then be more anecdotal, or as data-driven, or as evidence-driven, or as anecdotal as ideology-driven. Professor Sebastian was indeed right when he said that would I touch on a few of these aspects that he'd raised? I certainly will, but perhaps not in the way that Professor Sebastian might. I have my own way of raising them, and I'm sure that we can discuss this as we go on. So let me begin, ladies and gentlemen, anecdotally. I recall a time in 1994, so 30 years to the day, when I was a senior editor with the India Today group. My publisher and my editor-in-chief at the time literally fell from the moon and were threatening to fire me when I suggested what ultimately was published as the South Asia Business Series. They did not understand, even after India had unveiled its liberalization program, or so-called liberalization program, that it became relevant, it became necessary to look at South Asia as an interconnected entity and not merely as a sort of a sideshow of a political entity, which India has had the experience of with Pakistan, as we all know. And in the early 90s, India had also come out of a slightly disastrous war, conflict in Sri Lanka, which was a bad adventure, as we know. In Bangladesh, you had a sort of almost an anti-India government, if I may call it that. In Bhutan, it was slow going. The big projects in Bhutan hadn't yet come up. Maldives was a sort of a backwater. And Myanmar, nobody really looked at that particular point of time. So for me to go ahead and suggesting that, look, my magazine should spend literally lakhs of rupees, hundreds of thousands of rupees, to send me all over South Asia to speak to not just Indian business people, politicians, bureaucrats, and policymakers, and so on and so forth, and academicians, and think tank heads of think tanks, and thought people who were thinking about these things, and would actually go all across South Asia at the expense of a magazine with no backing, no funding, because I felt that it was something that we needed to do, looking at the future, was remarkable, and they stood by me after initial hemming and hawing. So I'm very glad to share with you that the South Asia Business Series did get published, and it ran over several weeks in India Today magazine. It was given billing, and more importantly, perhaps for me, I kept my job. And I became the South Asia guy. And I have not stopped being the South Asia guy. I'm a living, breathing South Asia fanatic, if you want me to call it that, in idea and in practice, in every way. So I bring to you a time when, and I begin with that because in the 90s, 30 years ago, I heard conversations then which were far more evolved in some ways than we have conversations that are taking place today. I remember going to meet Dr. Rahman Soban, who was then the chair of the Center for Policy Dialogue in Dhaka. And I was talking to Dr. Soban about regional trade. And he said, but of course, I remember speaking to the finance minister of Bangladesh at the time, Mr. Saifur Rahman. He's on the wrong side of he went on the wrong side of the divide now, but Mr. Rahman was one of the first people who was speaking about active collaboration with institutions across South Asia, including with India. That was a time when Sri Lanka was being spoken of as the next Singapore, still being spoken of as the next Singapore. Bhutan was the great big leap that India would make. Nepal was being seen as a country that India would reach out to. And I don't know if you recall the position papers from organizations like Confederation of Indian Industry, better known as CII, and McKinsey and Company. I think one of the few reports that McKinsey's got right, in my opinion. You can quote me on that. I'm not much of a McKinsey fan. But one of the things that McKinsey did well, was to see the scope of South Asia. That is one of the things they got right. And if you recall, at that time, South Asia was being looked at, if you looked at India as a kite, if you will, sort of, or a north-south, along the points of the compass, north, south, east, west, then you might recall that there was a conversation, actual conversation, about peacemaking with Pakistan using trade as the sort of the battering ram, if you will, or the gentle door knocker. Begin talking with trade, reach out to Pakistan and say, look, guys, we don't need to export each other's goods or export Indian goods via Dubai to Pakistan. We can do it directly across the border, but we need to talk peace first. That was the time when, and northern India was being seen as the sort of the manufacturing as a supplier to Pakistan. Equally, northern and central India at that point of time was being seen as the manufacturing and trade engine to supply Nepal. Eastern India was being looked at the manufacturing and trading engine to supply Bangladesh and possibly Myanmar. Southern India was being looked at, solidly being looked at as the interface with Sri Lanka. And this was the thought in the early 90s. And I speak to you now in 2024. And my question to you is, what the hell happened? Something did, or I would put it as something did not, in terms of the potential. SARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, and let me sort of give you a little brief background, even though you're well schooled in the background. I think it's important to set a sequence of events to bring us to the present day so that we can quickly do that and then use that as a springboard to look at the future. South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, established in 1985 with much fanfare and forethought, and I maintain foresight as well. SAPTA, SAPTA, South Asian Preferential Trading Agreement, was inaugurated, launched in 1993, second in year 2 of India's liberalization process, when India had begun an outreach to South Asia. The neighborhood first policy began to look ripe then. It's a lot riper now, but the fruition of it, or the seeding of it, really began at that particular point of time. We got so ambitious at that point of time that South Asian Preferential Trading Agreement in 1993 morphed to the South Asian Free Trade Arrangement, SAFTA, in 2004. And it looked great on paper. And that's the problem in South Asia, ladies and gentlemen, is that we got stuck at the level of paper policies and paper intentions, and have largely, I think, we have betrayed the vision of South Asia, or what South Asia can be. And I bring to you my concern about that. I bring to you my, I haven't lost hope. As you can see, I'm quite charged up about the idea of South Asia even today, as we must be, because I believe in the South Asian aspect, and I'm sort of, but my God, even with so much growth all around, where are we at now? I was reading a World Bank estimate not too long ago, where, I read that World Bank in this particular case and OECD have the most credible estimates, because they do, as we know, they do sort of overarching reporting on this. the estimate is that intra-SARC or intra-regional trade in South Asia is between 5 and 6% of the overall trade that South Asia has with the rest of the world. As opposed to, if I'm not wrong, it'll be about 25% for ASEAN and over 60% as we speak for the European Union. I mean, intra-EU trade, which is not always a good thing, because EU is sort of going into by itself trying to reduce intra-EU trade and trying to reach out to the rest of the world in order to scale up its trade and investment, as we know. But my God, I mean, 5% to 6%, I would give an arm and a leg to get it up to 25, to get it up to 30%, because this speaks of lost opportunity. This speaks to me of opportunity cost and opportunity lost. And that's, ladies and gentlemen, is really where I'm speaking to you this evening. That this is where I'm coming to you from. This is the core of my thesis, if you will, and the core of what I speak to you for. It's not all bad. Things are looking up in many ways. I'm happy to say that, I mean, 5 to 6% is not very much, but overall it adds up to about 31 billion US a year of intra-SARC trade or intra-South Asia trade as we speak. Of course, about $16 billion of that is trade between Bangladesh and India. 14 billion India to Bangladesh and 2 billion odd from Bangladesh to India. With Sri Lanka, we had scaled up to about 5 billion up to 2021, but that tanked because of the meltdown in Sri Lanka in 2022. But I believe it will pick up again because Sri Lanka is a natural, organic place to trade and to market in Indian products and Indian goods and services. You have a situation where in Nepal, we're at about plus minus 8 billion. And I'm converting some figures from the local currencies to US dollars to make it easier for us to get there. Bhutan was at about sort of where were we at? We're at about $1.5 billion of trade of goods and services between India and Bhutan. So it's actually being driven, as you can see, largely by India being the fulcrum in this particular case. And as yet, the other South Asian countries, our neighbors, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, are not, they're trading with each other. They're trading, very delighted to say that they're trading more aggressively with each other, but the quantum is very, very tiny right now. For instance, Bangladesh upgraded its PTA to FTA with Bhutan. And just the PTA alone, done 3 years ago, doubled, I say this with great sort of circumspection, of course, doubling from a small base. It went from about $11 million a year to about $22 million a year. You see, but it doubled just with that one PTA. And there's great hope that with the free trade agreement between Bangladesh and between Bhutan and Bangladesh, that quantum will increase. Nepal and Bangladesh trade is at about 50 million a year. It's not too bad given it came from practically nothing. So there are movements happening in this particular case. But I think that we need to go back in a way, back to the future, to use a cliche. We need to look at what worked for us in the 90s, what would have worked for us in the 20s, and sort of break out. I don't think we're pushing hard enough in the policy space, in the think tank space, in the public policy space, hard enough. We are beginning to push for these, for policies to come about, for streamlining to happen, for simplification of guidelines and so on and so forth to happen, which I'll come to in right after this, in South Asia. And here, of course, I segue into the poison pill in this particular instance, which is essentially India and Pakistan. That has poisoned the South Asian relations in every manner, from SARC and of course naturally to SAPTA and SAFTA. Everybody, all the 7 countries, Afghanistan wasn't in the picture then, but all 7 countries of South Asia signed on for SAPTA. They signed on the dotted line. They even ratified SAFTA back in their home countries. The governments ratified SAFTA. So SAFTA is a living, breathing thing. It is a valid document or valid agreement, but the nuts and bolts of SAFTA never went into place. So you never had the guidelines, you never had the duty structure, you never had the goods and services that would be allowed beyond a point, and you never really had the comprehensive look, because everything from every substantial thing, as we know well, has been torpedoed by the poison pill in South Asia, which continues to be, alas, the relationship, the fraught relationship between Pakistan and India. And here I must say, you know, I mean, I was amazed when Pakistan signed on for SAFTA and SAFTA, because this happened in SAFTA happened in 1993, and that was at one of the worst moments of Pakistan-India relations, when there was an uptick of militancy in Kashmir, which took place from '89. So in the early '90s, we were in bilateral hell, if you will, if I may use that term, and yet people were seeing the future. People were willing to spend time, money, and resources to sit down and talk about a South Asian future, or at least a regional future, or at least a future beyond bilaterals into trilaterals and quadrilaterals and quintilaterals. If not all seven, then three. If not three, if not four, then two. If not five, then four. I mean, people were beginning to talk like that. And as we know, that BIMSTEC came out of that. BIMSTEC was born from that. The Bay of Bengal initiative on multi-sector. I keep tripping up on this multi-sectoral and technological cooperation, which includes all the key countries of South Asia, bar Pakistan, and of course we have Thailand in the picture as well. So you had, as we know well, you had these segues from sort of a poisoned SARC, a poisoned SAFTA, to mechanisms like BIMSTEC, to mechanisms like BBIN, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal initiative, which is almost entirely predicated on trade, on free trade, literally free trade between the four countries, which saw the logic, and that is actually the logic of my title that I bring to you, Eastern South Asia. Because when you look at BBIN, it gives you the block that is Eastern South Asia, which is Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal. And India can can go into these countries from all across India, but the interface is really in Eastern South Asia. That is, I would describe that from Nepal moving eastwards to about Kunming, moving south to Sri Lanka as is one sort of large rectangle, is what I would call Eastern South Asia. Myanmar is unfortunately a terrible part of it right now. I'll get to that in a minute. So, and I just want to bring this sweep to you because I want to contextualize where we can go from here and what's happening and what the thinking is how the thinking is working in a practical, on-ground sense, in a B2B sense, in a G2G sense as well, or even in a P2P sense, people-to-people sense. So there is movement on these lines, but again, I sense that we're not pushing hard enough. I'll give an example about BBIN. It took off in 2015. 4 countries came up and signed up on BBIN. It happened in Thimphu, as we know, the capital of Bhutan. There were, if you read the BBIN charter, it has grand things. Fortunately, unlike SARC, SAFTA, and SAFTA, the agreement, the text of BBIN is thankfully short. They didn't want to overpitch, they didn't want to oversell. It was just a 2-page statement, which is, I think, the smallest, the shortest, littlest statement ever in international relations in this region. It's a compact, useful statement of 2 pages. You'll find it on the website, on the internet very, very easily. I urge you to look at it. It had set a schedule to get all the paperwork done by the end of 2015. Indeed, in 4 months' time, by October of 2015, BBIN was to be up and running, literally. All the duty structures would have been sorted. All the agreements for goods and services in place, or to have been put into place with the free trade agreement, the so-called SAFTA, had to be ironed out. Excise structures were to be fixed. Border checkpoints were to be fixed. Weighing systems would have to be fixed, streamlining between these 4 countries. Everything would be done within 5 months. In 2024, in March 24, BBIN had a meeting in Dhaka where BBIN met with one of the Bs, Bhutan, as an observer, because in 2017, 2 short years after BBIN was signed, Bhutan pulled out of BBIN because of domestic pressures. And Bhutan has remained an observer country in BBIN ever since. And I'm given to understand that Bhutan is actively considering re-entering, rejoining BBIN. I'll come to the reason as to why I think that is happening. It's very, very a survival-oriented reason for Bhutan, but so be it. If the future and economic prosperity and a shared prosperity and even survival form the bedrock of logic to move ahead with South Asian relations, so be it. That is my perspective on this. So Bhutan was there in March 2024 as an observer country, and of course the officials and ministers from the other 3 countries, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, were there in Dhaka as well in March 2024, not too long ago, less than a couple of months ago. And they were talking about the same things that they said that they would do in 2015. So what the hell happened? I mean, this I thought was one would think that BBIN was a can do, will do kind of project. SAFTA, SARC itself was a pie in the sky in many ways, given South Asia's fraught geopolitics and the fact that South Asia is actually lives in its own ring of what I like to call its own ring of fire, the South Asian ring of fire. Quite unlike the Pacific ring of fire, we have our own little degree of descriptions over here. But I'm just trying to prove a point here. I mean, BIMSTEC, doable. BBIN, doable. It hasn't really worked in a regional sense. What has worked, which brings hope, is that Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh, and of course India to a great extent, are bilaterally pushing the pace. In the sense that India, to my mind, began it in a slightly cynical way to counterbalance China. So when it looked to Bangladesh and this is a point that Professor Sebastian was saying when we talked about accessibility of Eastern India with Northeastern India, one of the first transshipment projects, as we know, happened between Eastern India and the state of Tripura, where the machinery for the NTPC, National Thermal Power Corporation, gas-fed plant in Palitana in Tripura, Bangladesh permitted transshipment of equipment for that. Sweet result, Bangladesh now purchases power from the Palitana plant. It works. When it works, it really works. Bangladesh permitted transshipment of food grain from Eastern India to shore up Food Corporation of India supplies in the entire Northeast, beginning with Tripura. And that, as we know, or you might know, began this wonderful development that happened in Tripura, which is one of our furthest provinces, furthest states in our union, where Tripura decided that, what the hell, we will do our own foreign policy. So Tripura began to reach out to Bangladesh. I've been in conferences in Agartala where the Prime Minister of Bangladesh's representatives have come. Not the people from New Delhi, but people from Dhaka went to Agartala to talk business, to talk investment, to talk relationships, to talk trans-border activities, to talk transshipment. It happened at a Tripura to Bangladesh level, at a state to country level, not a country to country level. It was amazing to see. So some happy things have happened where Tripura has actually caught the comet by the tail and said, we need to do this because of our survival. And now Tripura is the leading edge of India, Bangladesh, Northeastern India transshipment. That is the model that now India and Bangladesh are using for transshipment across roadways, across railways, and across the waterways. It comes from a can do or need to do, let me rephrase it, from a state of India realizing it needs to happen. So to my mind, Tripura was pushing foreign policy at that particular sub-regional level. So there are some sub-regional stories that are wonderful to see. That's happening. India, to offset, to politically stabilize Northeastern India and also to look at China as to look at a bulwark against China has, as we know, for the past 10 years or so, or actually 15 years or so, been looking at northeastern India, the development of northeast India in a more rapid way. The only way that could really work, and I'm glad Bangladesh saw the logic, is through Bangladesh. Without Bangladesh, it wouldn't work. Because Bangladesh permits transshipment, but of course, with a quid pro quo, because when you do, when India sends its goods via Bangladesh, the deal says you have to use Bangladesh transport. You just have to use Bangladesh railway carriages, Bangladeshi trucks, Bangladeshi shipping. So be it. It's win-win. This is, I'm sorry, I get a bit excited when I talk about this, but I do look for good news, even with my 30-year baggage of cynicism and dreaming and hopefulness. And this is actually something that's working, because a lot of the projects, or a lot of the roads and the railway tracks and the trading hubs that are there in Bangladesh, which India uses for transshipment, are now Bangladesh assets, which now Bangladesh uses as hubs to export out. It's not just for Indian transshipment, but these facilities, infrastructure facilities, are now Bangladesh's infrastructure facilities. So Bangladesh wins too, even though often the optics in Bangladesh say that, it's selling out to India too much, it needs to scale back. But I keep telling I'm an Indian in Bangladesh. I mean, how South Asian can we get? And I'm representing a Bangladeshi university in India in front of you. How much more regional and sub-regional do you want to get it? So I speak from what I know, because I travel and I see and I speak to people. So people look at these practical applications. There's another push that is coming, which I'm very, very happy to say, is that when India's been getting ambitious and looking at its outreach programs, we forget that so have Nepal. Nepal too has ambition. Bangladesh too has ambition. Sri Lanka too has ambition, and so does Bhutan. And Myanmar is in a mess. We'll come to that in a bit. Maldives too has ambition, as we just saw in the last 6 months. It wishes to move freely, and so be it. It should happen. But Pakistan too had ambition and continues to have ambition, but it's in a bit of a political mess right now. Well, that's okay. It'll come out of it. I'm sure it'll happen, because people go through phases. What has happened is that Nepal has realized that it needs to look beyond India, which is its largest trading partner, and it can do good business with Bangladesh. Bangladesh has realized that it has a good market in Nepal, and it's just not India's bailiwick. So Bangladesh and India are, in a way, reaching out for trilateral deals, if you will, sort of a, BIN, because Bhutan is not in that equation, where it is, India already permits Bangladesh and Nepal to use its territory for transshipment of goods and services. It's like third country facilities. So it is already permitted. But Bangladesh and Nepal are now forcing India to say, Bangladesh is to say that, look, Nepal has planned for massive investment in its energy sector. It could be controversial to say, but that it's largely hydroelectricity. And there are pros and cons in what hydroelectricity can do to terrain and to people, primarily through their displacement and possibly not adequate rehabilitation, which we've seen in our region all too frequently, unfortunately. But having said that, there is an ambition to produce electricity, manufacture electricity, and then use. So Nepal is now looking at India as a market, and I'm sure you ladies and gentlemen know that Nepal has actually exported electricity to India and is a member of the daily trading in power, the power futures trading that takes place. I mean, Nepal has actually sold power using an Indian power trading platform, right? And as Mr. Modi, Prime Minister Modi went to Nepal, when Prime Minister of Nepal came to New Delhi last year, Mr. Modi, Prime Minister of India, announced that we will scale up our imports of Nepal-made power from 450 megawatts to, over the years, 10,000 megawatts. But this gentleman speaks in hyperbole. So even if we scale back from 10,000 megawatts to 2,000 megawatts, it's still a heck of a lot from 450 megawatts. Now, Bangladesh is looking to Nepal to buy Nepali power, but it needs Indian territory to transmit that power. It doesn't have the transmission lines, the link lines between Nepal to cross over to Bangladesh aren't robust enough. So now Bangladesh and Nepal have gone to ADB to look for funding and are compelling India to one of the things that happened out of the Nepali Prime Minister's trip to New Delhi when Mr. Modi made this grand announcement was for the Nepali Prime Minister, Mr. Dahal, to get a guarantee from Mr. Modi that India would provide all facilities to have its territory be used and its power systems to be used for exporting, for Nepal to export power to Bangladesh. Now, Bhutan and Nepal are speaking similarly. Bhutan and Bangladesh are speaking similarly. Bhutan also looks for to export its electricity, and Bangladesh is looking to buy. Bangladesh is looking to export. So now you have a dynamic situation where the smaller countries of South Asia, which are located in Eastern South Asia, to which India looks at for its geo-economic security, development, and also its territorial security, and also its geopolitical security right now. Because China is always the let me call it the bull in the China shop, to sort of flip the animal analogies over here. The bull in the China shop is China. If anybody wishes to dispute me on that, we can have a little adda afterwards. But to me, the bull in the China shop is China. And to me, it seems, so be it. I mean, if you need China to do policy tweaks and twists to get regional or sub-regional cooperation going, so be it. Anything works, as far as I'm concerned. So the way, what I'm trying to convey to you is that at a policy level, at a bilateral level, and now the smaller countries of South Asia, our neighbors, our significant others, if I may call them that, are now pushing the pace. They're compelling India to say, and I've heard this conversation as you will have. When you go to Kathmandu, you go to Dhaka, you go to Sylhet, you go to Thimphu, or Colombo for that matter, you'll hear questions about neighborhood first policy of India. Show us the policy, show us the money, show us your intention. Let's make a regional grid of it. Let's make a regional go of it. It can't only be driven by India's bilateral needs. We too have our bilateral needs, our trilateral needs, our sub-regional needs, and our needs because we want to look at this to secure our futures. Bhutan, for instance, is I was talking about BBI and about the possibility of Bhutan rejoining BBI. I believe that it's primarily driven by Bhutan's grave concern right now that it's losing a lot of its brightest minds to migration. It's a country of 800,000 people. And every year, 25 to 30,000 people leave Bhutan. I mean, it's the Parsi syndrome in Bhutan, if you will. It's sort of Bhutan's Parsi syndrome. Now, Bhutan is looking at ways to develop its socioeconomic structure to make the country more robust. And one of the ways it's trying to create an option by making Bhutan a regional hub for education, a regional hub for trade and investment, a regional hub for information technology. So alongside the Royal Office of Bhutan, the King's Office, pushing for policy changes in Bhutan, as some of you might know, that they've also unveiled, the King of Bhutan last October, and increasingly since then unveiled something that is called the Gelaphu Mindfulness City, which is just north of the border with Assam, in the Bodoland area, in the Bodo territories of Assam. It's a massive project, as big or bigger than Singapore in terms of area. And it is supposed to be an integrated city where the whole world is welcome. So they're going out, and the King of Bhutan is doing PowerPoint presentations to global investors in Europe and Singapore and elsewhere to say, come, the King of Bhutan is making PowerPoint presentations to say, the key element of Gelaphu for the mindfulness city to work is that India needs to be part of it too, because people come to they can fly into Gelaphu, but you need to transport yourself to Gelaphu through India. You need to drive through India to come to Gelaphu. When Bangladeshi citizens need to travel to Nepal, unless they fly to Nepal, they have to get an Indian visa to cross. When Bangladeshi citizens want to travel to Bhutan, unless they fly, they don't need a visa like Indians. They don't need they get a visa on arrival in Nepal, but if they cross Indian territory on road, not by air, they need a visa, and the bilateral visa system is among the most cumbersome. So along with this grand vision of regional connectivity and regional growth and regional aspirations, to hark to what Professor Sebastian was saying, is that we need to be working at the nitty-gritties of it, sort of the nuts and bolts of it. BBIN is all about policy nuts and bolts, about practical implementation, backroom nuts and bolts of literally gazetteering a policy. That is where BBIN is at. BIMSTEC needs to go in. I'm happy that India is being forced to listen to Nepal, to listen to Bangladesh, to listen to Bhutan increasingly, to pay attention to its own neighborhood, to pay attention to its own stated neighborhood policy, because it serves India's national interests. It's woken up to that. I'll give you I want to have a conversation with you, ladies and gentlemen. So I think I've sort of stated my case in terms of where we, as practitioners and policymakers or think tank people or academicians or as students, we need to be pushing policy along in this particular way, in the best possible way we can. And I think our interaction between the two universities of these countries is a way. I'll give you an example. I'm sure you've heard that Bangladesh and India, when the leaders of the two countries meet, or ministers of the two countries meet, or bureaucrats of the two countries meet. Typically, businessmen have no time for this kind of rubbish. Academicians have no time for this kind of rubbish, and practitioners have no time for this kind of rubbish. We don't hark back to 1971 and the grand help that India provided to birth Bangladesh from the evil clutches of Pakistan. This is at the realm of politics and at the realm of bureaucracy. So when these G2G interactions happen, a lot of this gets talked about. The practical stuff doesn't get talked about. So now, one of the things that has got buried in this sort of miasma of we helped you, so you must help us, and our relationship goes back to the glory days of 1971, it doesn't translate necessarily to the things that Bangladesh thinks it needs from India. For instance, a more liberal visa regime. I don't know if you know, but the second highest group of tourists to India are now from Bangladesh after America. Bangladesh has replaced the United Kingdom the last time I checked. I could be wrong, it could have changed back. But the last time I checked, Bangladesh was the number 2 group of tourists to India. We have to respect this. And when I say we, I speak here as an Indian, as a South Asian. We need to be respecting the ambitions of our regional neighbors. If at all we expect our sub-regional ambition and enterprise to work, and our regional enterprise and ambition to work. So one of the things that have fallen through the cracks, along with the visa regime, is the problem of river water sharing. I don't know if some of you know, but 54 Indian rivers decant into Bangladesh. So in a way, geography makes Bangladesh what it is, and India contributes to the geography because of the lines that are drawn on the map. It so happens that 54, we only talk about 4 of these rivers, Ganga, Padma, Tista, and occasionally Brahmaputra, though there is no limit on the Brahmaputra's water ingress into Bangladesh, and the Barak and the Kushiara system in the east, northeast. The Tista is something that Bangladesh has been pining for agreements to happen, and has been forever pushed back by India, citing West Bengal's objection to it and saying that water is a federal subject in India, therefore West Bengal's acquiescence to share, to increase the quota, or to at least supply Bangladesh with the agreed quota of water needs to be agreed to by West Bengal, right? What has happened since then is that because there's been because of the lack of water, northern Bangladesh, parts of northern Bangladesh in the Tista River basin are devastated. Crop productivity has dropped, water tables have dropped, people's livelihoods have been affected. And what has happened with repeated requests that Bangladesh has made to India, we will see. What happened last year is that I was at an event organized by the Embassy of China in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, where the Chinese ambassador announced in public, and very gleefully, I might add, he had this big smile as he said it, and I smiled too, but for different reasons, said, we will work with Bangladesh to develop the Teesta Basin. So basically, China stepped in and said, we will develop the Teesta Basin for all the ills. Implication that for the ills, all the ills, the lack of a Teesta proper implementation and sharing of the Teesta water with Bangladesh has wrought upon Bangladesh. China is there to help fix the problem because we are friends of Bangladesh, we are partnering Bangladesh. And that area, and I will end with this, is right next to the Chicken's Neck, the Siliguri corridor. That's the Teesta Basin, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why the Chinese ambassador, I'm sure, was smiling. And I, for sure, was smiling when I saw, when he said that, because I said, you know, is this what it takes? And sure enough, and I've written about it in my writings and my columns, and I've talked about it. Sure enough, in the last fortnight, the Foreign Secretary of India was in Dhaka and said, we will partner Bangladesh in sort of incentivizing the Teesta Basin, and we will do good things for Bangladesh in the Teesta Basin, and essentially to work with, by implication, work with China as a recovery project for the Teesta Basin. And you didn't need, you didn't need, I mean, this was beyond a nursery lesson to say geopolitical implications have stepped in yet again for something that should have been a no-brainer for regional development and growth. So tender mercies, ladies and gentlemen, small mercies, but we take our wins where they happen as a regionalist, as a South Asia person. And to me, this is essentially the sort of great game that we think our countries are playing with each other. And maybe they are, and I think they are. But great games are worth nothing beyond great goals which provide the security to back end those great games. And to my mind, the regional or the sub-regional game in South Asia is not a zero-sum game as great games tend to be. This doesn't need to be a zero-sum game. This can be a game of partnerships. And that is essentially the way I look at a segue or a transition from great games to great goals. So my apologies for coming up with a slightly dramatic title for my fairly nuts and bolts presentation, I hope. But we live in dramatic times, ladies and gentlemen, so I couldn't resist. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for a very enlightening and interesting talk. We're now going to move to the open session, discussion and Q&A. I will quickly introduce Professor Kinshuk Sarkar, who will moderate this session. Professor Kinshuk Sarkar is Associate Professor in the General Management and Public Policy area at the Goa Institute of Management. He had earlier served as Labour Administrator for more than 2 decades with the government of West Bengal. His interests include labour and industrial economics, development economics, business economics, labor laws, labor administration, etc. I also kindly request the other dignitaries to please take their seat on the dais. Professor Sebastian Morris, Professor Ajit Parulekar. Yeah. Okay. I request Professor Kinshuk Sarkar to take over.
Good evening, all. Such a nice presentation by Professor Sudeep. So we go straight into the open session. Let's open the session to the audience. I will take questions both from the physical audience and from the online audience. I'll request our support staff to kind of, if we can prepare a kind of a online audience questions. Before that, we take few questions from the audience present here. I think Professor Deepankar has a question. Please ask.
Hello. Good evening, sir. It's a nice presentation. I am Professor Deepankar Das. I'm an assistant professor at Goa Institute of Management. Sir, I have a simple question. And in your presentation, you have mentioned many bilateral, trilateral, and multilateral trade agreements and how some of them got some success, some of them are not. So my question is why South Asian countries fail to create a common currency for their trade purposes? Number one, if it is not possible, then can we avoid dollar and can we accept any other currencies that is happening in our South Asian region in our trade purposes? Because I think that could be an instrument and that can help us to foster our trade policies or growth in terms of trade.
Right. Thank you very much, Professor, and thank you for coming. Well, a common currency was seen as a part of the SAARC blueprint at one time, as we know. But again, it was a paper dream, a fine dream to my mind, but a dream that fell apart because, as we know from the experience of EU, you need tremendous adjustments and a sort of several economies walking in lockstep for a currency unification to happen. And I'm not a finance person, but I see the logic of it. And one sees the logic of it. In South Asia, that didn't happen for some reasons, because even the building blocks were not effectively implemented. So currency union comes much later. For instance, ASEAN doesn't have a currency union. It has a free trade regime. It has a now increasingly liberal visa regime with the countries of ASEAN, but it's far from a currency union. So it is a very complicated process. But there are things that are happening in the region, as you might already be aware. That is right now possibly the next best thing. For instance, India and Nepal, they don't trade with each other in US dollars. Bhutan and India don't trade with each other in US dollars necessarily, right? Bangladesh has recently, as of last year, has effected a system by which, because Bangladesh is now facing a tremendous balance of payments situation and a tremendous foreign exchange crisis right now. And it had recently entered, as you know, into an arrangement with the International Monetary Fund for $5 billion plus or so worth of bridge loans to tide over its foreign exchange crisis, which has plummeted over the last 3 to 4 years from about 40 odd billion to a little less than 20 billion as we speak. So it's in crisis right now. What it did do is that, and India played good neighbor with that, is that there is a system where State Bank of India and ICICI Bank, and in Bangladesh, Eastern Bank and Prime Bank, if I'm not, or Citibank, they've come to an agreement where at least the Bangladeshi component of the trade, which is about $2 billion odd. So $2 billion worth of trade between the two countries would be now settled in INR, would be settled in rupees. So accounts have been opened, trading has happened, and I, of course, tried a quick one saying, why can't what honorarium that I get in Dhaka can't be channeled through this system into India, into my account in Goa? And so they said no. Essentially, it hasn't gone to the retail level yet. It is at the trade level, but only as an experimental $2 billion worth of trade. I think it should be more. I think it should, if you ask me, it should be the whole amount, because it will free up India, it will free up Bangladesh. Because it's not like India needs to shore up its foreign exchange chest with its exports to Bangladesh, $14 billion. It's not going to really do much to the Indian foreign exchange war chest. Similarly, I mean, Sri Lanka is something that we can, is a separate point. But there are things in place where people are looking at options besides the dollar. Like India settled its oil bills with the UAE with dirhams. There is a system where Bangladesh, because of the foreign exchange crisis, used an existing channel which started between China and Russia, which was energized after the war with Ukraine and Russia, where China was using its own SWIFT, if I may call it that, its own clearance system to take in payments. And Bangladesh is now officially using, not entirely, but using the Chinese clearing system to ship some of its, for some of its fund flow. I'm not exactly sure as to what the its precise amount is, but I know that it's up and running. So there are these sort of baby steps, if you will, in sub-regional practices beyond the India-Nepal practice, which has been there for decades, and the India-Bhutan practice that has been there for decades. I'm a sort of a non-dollar guy, if you ask me, but I may be taking on too much more than my expertise in this particular case. So I'll step back before I fall into a trap of my own making.
So before I take another questions, before I take another question from the physical audience, like there is a question from an online participant, Abrar Farhan Zaman. I read out the question for Professor Chakravarti to answer. The question is it possible for Goa and Bangladesh to collaborate by sharing climate change mitigation strategies and technologies to combat the impact of climate change in coastal areas? This is the first question. Second question is that could there be more joint research initiatives between Goa and Bangladesh, South-South collaboration? So these are the two questions from Abrar Farhan Zaman.
Well, I think Goa, and I'm really stepping into it here, I think Goa would be delighted to go on its own, go by itself and deal with the rest of India and rest of the world. And I say rest of India and the rest of the world with great sense of responsibility and not irresponsibility. And that was a joke, ladies and gentlemen. But there's a point to it. I think Goa is capable of it. And I think, Mr. Zaman, part of your question is probably answered by this. Goa can and Bangladesh can, but maybe it needs to be institution-led, and perhaps the very fact that ULAB and Jim are here together in Goa, and Professor Sarkar, Kinshu Sarkar visited ULAB in Dhaka, and that's how this whole collaboration got going in a way, speaks to the possibility and the reality of such collaboration, and I'm sure it will happen. And one of the aspects in which, and I can say this as a person who's been a resident in Goa, though I have colleagues in the audience who are far more qualified to comment on this, is that Goa's been at, there's been a lot of active participation by what we in Goa call Goenkars, who are people of Goa and who have taken up long-term residency in Goa, who believe in the land and its climate and its future and the need to protect it. They have actually for several years now have been doing many active projects and protests and village level outreach programs, and even to the extent of changing policy, I'm happy to say in many levels, land use, water use, all kinds of things. And I'm sure that the Goan example of this sort of policy pushback and the citizens claiming the land for themselves from people who presume to rule or govern the citizens is a useful example and a useful model for our colleagues in Dhaka, Bangladesh, and certainly ULAB and its entities to learn from and to collaborate with. So yes, but I couldn't resist the first quip. I wish Goa very well in its endeavor to claim for itself its own unique identity in the world.
So there is a question. Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Hi, I'm Vandana Vasudevan. I'm a development sector professional. So I heard you say that the poisonous relationship between India and Pakistan has sort of spoilt the entire, muddied the waters and at least prevented SAARC from really blossoming into what it could have. But at the same time, you also said that there's a lot of alliances being made between the other countries like BBIN, for example, and I'm sure Pakistan is doing its own thing with Nepal or Sri Lanka. So that fraught relationship between India and Pakistan seems to have affected only them, but the rest of the country, rest of the region seems to be doing its own thing, right? So how are the two reconciled?
No, it's well, it's a absolutely terrific question. And but the thing is that when Nepal and Pakistan do their own thing, as you put it, it does its own thing by air. It doesn't do its own thing by land. When Sri Lanka and Pakistan do their own thing, which is very, very limited as we speak. If you look at the trade statistics between Pakistan and other countries of South Asia, you will find that it's even less in number than, say, the trade between Bangladesh and Nepal and Bhutan and Nepal, so on and so forth. So indeed, it's doing its own thing. But when the two largest countries in a region and two mega economies, and Pakistan at one time was on its, I mean, it was, I don't know if you know, they had a wonderful finance minister called Mahbubul Haq, who in the late 80s was the finance minister to look up to. In India, we were looking at Dr. Haq as the go-to finance minister who would sort of be the flag bearer for South Asia with policy. So there was a time when Pakistan wasn't quite the so-called basket case or the political case, or if you want to be dramatic, the failed state that it seems to be. And I'm exaggerating here. There is a recovery prospect, of course. So I think when the two biggest pieces in the jigsaw take themselves out, I think this relationship damages the entirety. And where the other thing we need to remember, ma'am, is that SAARC is a place where things are decided unanimously. All partners in SAARC have to agree for things to work. It's not by majority. SAARC decisions are unanimous. If, like the UN Security Council, there is a veto, then it doesn't go forward. It works similarly with SAARC. So all partners, including not the observer country, but all 7 partners need to move in tandem, in lockstep. So there is, in a way, at a very basic level, some SAARC functions do work. For instance, cultural exchanges. There is some degree of interaction even between Pakistan and India, though in a very limited way. There is some interaction in a cultural sense, in a cultural sector, did I call it sector? My apologies. In the cultural arena or the cultural area, which is much broader than trade and investment, and a far more 360 degree than, say, trade, investment, or politics. That's the dynamics of SAARC. And it is because we recognize this, we as in South Asia recognize this, is why BIMSTEC happened, which is why BBIN happened. You had these breakaways take place because it was felt that, and in this case, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bhutan were on board with India, because otherwise you wouldn't have had BBIN, you wouldn't have had BIMSTEC, which includes Sri Lanka as well, to have these sort of sideshows, regional and sub-regional sideshows in the meantime, if I may put it that. But they've now become the principal activities. And SAARC is not the principal activity or the principal stage any longer. That is how it stands. Sorry.
Yes, please. Professor Morris.
Yeah, see, I'll build or take from where the question of the Pakistan poison was raised. See, actually, when you do a simple analysis using the gravity model, okay, of trade between countries, the trade between each of these countries should be not twice, but many times the current level.
Indeed.
Okay. So if I were to use a standard gravity model where I put the GDPs of these countries down and their, distances, rational distances between them, then as I said, the trade should be about 3-4 times what it is. Now I can understand India's trade with Pakistan being low because we obviously have a problem. But the trade, even with the other countries, is actually much lower than what it should have been.
Indeed.
If we, and even if you don't believe in the gravity model, which by the way works much better than any other model of trade, in the first instance to predict the volume of trade. None of the other Heckscher-Ohlin or other models work as well as this. Now, the ASEAN is a good comparator. And if you look back to ASEAN about maybe 30, 40 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, their level of development was similar to ours, and the volume of trade across the ASEAN was stupendous. Okay. Now, see, my point is that is it only a political issue? Okay. Isn't there a capability issue of the people who really need to do the negotiations, namely the bureaucracy, okay, and the intelligence here? So when I look at, let us say, the way India went about negotiating with Bangladesh on energy, it was guaranteed to be a loss. It would never have happened. Only marginally it could have happened. India negotiating with Iran on Iranian gas, again, it was bound to lose. It would never get the deal because it always operated from a principle. I mean, there was really no principle. It was more emotive. It was more, okay, the past. It's more, look, we are the original inheritors of the great British Brown Sahib, and therefore, we will do it like this and so on. So the economic aspect, how you negotiate with another guy and tell him that, look, it's in your economic interest, show it to him, be accommodative. The idea that, a regional trade agreement with such a close cultural and geographical, unity or proximity would have to be different from a trade agreement, let us say, across the Himalayas or across with the US and so on. That idea was still not there. I mean, you don't go for a quid pro quo with Nepal. You don't tell Nepal that, look, you put in the money, you develop your power, and we'll buy it. Okay. See, after all, if India can force extend onto Nepal, right? We can put in the investment, we can put in the money, we can put in the dams and buy the hydroelectricity. Because the entire market for Nepali power is ultimately India. How much can Nepal use? And we need to use that. Okay. So similarly, there are many such issues which comes in where I believe that the government of India does not have the right framework for negotiations because it's dependent on a class of people who are political, who are historical and emotional in their approach, and not necessarily who can analyze it in terms of quid pro quo and what we call negotiation strategy. For instance, if we were to go with a contract with, let us say, Iran or with Bangladesh or something on a long-term contract, there are endogenous risks. Okay? Now, how do you use the endogenous risks to your and the other person's advantage? How do you sign a deal which actually works? You'll have to put yourself in the other guy's shoes. These abilities are not there with the Indian bureaucracy. Okay? So I would think that there is an administrative side. What is your view on this?
All right. I'm happy to say that Indian money is actually being put into, Indians are bidding for Nepal hydroelectricity projects, and several projects are in play right now, including one from which Nepal hopes to import power, which is actually an India-financed project. So it's not as if the Indian bureaucracy doesn't know the sort of the art of writing rules or the art of negotiation. I think the Indian bureaucracy, or I think all bureaucracies, when they're effective and implementation oriented, know the negotiation rules rather well. I mean, when they want to be the engine of serviceability, it can work. I've seen it happen. But please, let me finish. There is Chinese money being put into Nepal hydroelectricity. India has invested in Bhutan hydroelectricity projects. There are two major projects that are now, which are financed by India, as you would know. So, and almost all of it goes to, all the power goes to India. And in future, similar projects will supply power to Bangladesh as well, as it does to India. And Bhutan looks at a lot of the northeastern and much of its sort of hinterland, if you will, electricity hinterland, as a power exporting opportunity. But I do, so I think I see movement, but here I can't resist an anecdotal, a bit of a joke actually related to me many decades ago by a gentleman I used to absolutely adore called G.V. Ramakrishna. He's one of our earliest trade negotiators, used to be a commerce secretary, ran SEBI, and so on and so forth. Also was the earliest person to put together a disinvestment, a so-called disinvestment blueprint for India, way before Arun Shuri claimed to have done it. Mr. Ramakrishna told me this one thing because he used to negotiate for what before WTO was used to be known as GATT. So he told me this joke when I was a business journalist, so I actually went. And when I met GVR, as we called him, we used to smoke a cigar and wore these lovely ties. And he was he's just a terrific all-around guy. And he said, Sudeep, what do I tell you? Because I had that GATT booklet then, not a booklet, but a huge, what in North India we call a potha. It had a big document. And he would talk to the bureaucrats, and they got stuck on phytosanitary. So he actually had a question from a bureaucrat saying, what the hell are we bothering about with commodes? So you had a situation where, and this is and I believe GVR, I mean, he wouldn't mess around with a joke like that. Short point being that I think we've moved on from there. I think there has been development or sensitization, to use an NGO phrase, in India's bureaucracy. A lot of the Indian Foreign Service officers who come into play, a lot of the Indian Administrative Service officers who are coming in to the system in the last 10 years, 15 years, I can assure you, if you look at the profiles, are people who are economics graduates, who are trade specialists, who know their commerce, who are scientists, who have diverse interests beyond just their engineers, their management graduates. These are the people that are coming into our and I didn't for a minute think that I would have to stand up and speak on behalf of the Indian Administrative Service or the Indian Foreign Service. But let me say that I see good things happening. It, of course, needs to be a lot more enhanced, a lot more energized, and a lot more worldly wise and a lot more professional. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But we've moved on from when Mr. G.V. Ramakrishna cracked that joke with me and he couldn't stop laughing himself, saying, Sudeep, and I'm a journalist and he's a trade specialist and is a senior bureaucrat in government. And he's saying, where you tell me, when I go to Morocco to trade, to negotiate, when I go here, when I go there, what do I go with? What backing do I have? What ammunition do I carry? Because it can't just be me who understands the difference between sanitary and phytosanitary. But we've moved on from there, I'm happy to say. Maybe I'm more positive than you might want to be at this point of time, but I think we are getting better at the game.
There is a question from the back.
Compliments to you for a balanced and well articulated answer. In fact, I appreciate all your answers, which were given very elicitly. What I would like to tell you is, most of the time we like to make a comment when just when Sachin Tendulkar is playing, how he should play. We try to comment on this by sitting in an armchair. It's very difficult to understand the reality of the factor, because there are geopolitical issues involved when you take a decision. Sometimes you negotiate with the other country not because of the profit part of it, but to have the hold on that area, or to counter the other nefarious activities which are from the other. I would not like to name the countries. So these are some of the issues which we need to take into consideration whenever these trade deals and all these things are being considered. And secondly, we all talk about India-Pakistan deterioration and all that. Do you know that the largest steel unit is owned by an Indian in Pakistan?
Well, you clearly know a lot more about the nefarious places around which you will not name, but then you name.
Yeah.
And then, so why don't you tell us what you know?
I may not be able to bring out everything because...
No, but maybe we can continue the conversation, but I think your point is made, Professor. So nefarious purposes aside, if I may, we need to be realistic.
True. In fact, nefarious means, see, I'll tell you one simple thing. Like China would like to have a better hold of all our neighbors to, have to strangle our country. So we need to counter that also by.
And yet India and China have $114 billion
absolutely
trade.
right. Absolutely.
So,
Similarly, in
I mean-
Pakistan, we have a lot of investments.
So what's right and what's wrong?
So I'm telling you,
Is
see,
China nefarious or is Pakistan nefarious? I mean,
Go-
let's
see-
not get into these deep.
No. I tell you why. Because there
uh,
are some comments coming from different sections, which I would like to counter, and that's why I brought
So
this in.
I think
And
here,
the geopolitical issues are very, very important for a country.
if I may, so that it doesn't sort of descend into a sort of an ideological situation here. I think the purpose here is to try and understand, if I may. I think that the whole purpose of this discussion, and this is a collaboration between two universities, which we are looking forward very much to. The whole purpose that we bring to the table, sir. I know what I can't presume to speak for your purpose, but our purpose at this table and for this evening and future interactions going forward will be to identify how we can do things better and contribute our input to regional cooperation, because I think we believe in shared peace and prosperity. I think there is no doubt to my mind in one iota in this room that this is not the future that we look to. Otherwise, this conference wouldn't have happened. So
one single thing I would like to tell: I am not anti what you are thinking of. It's not that. I have been a SARC academy trainer also, so I have been in touch with all the SARC countries.
Good for you. You should resume that interaction.
No,
you
no.
had a point.
So
Pushkar,
next question, please.
Pushkar.
And if you can kindly briefly introduce yours.
That would be useful.
You want me to?
No, you don't need to introduce yourself.
It's pretty much an informal gathering. So,
Of course it is.
so couple of things that came to mind, Sudeep, and from my from my student days. One, the big book of the 1980s, The Rise of the Trading State, right? I mean, Richard Rosecrans. I'm an academic. I mean, just citing a book, it betrays that, right? So Rosecrans's idea that trading is the way to prosperity, right? I mean, and here we are looking at the South Asian region. We have these states which are adjacent to each other, and you would think that despite the weight of history or the advantages of history, that broad cultural continuity all around, somewhere we would get to that point where trading would be seen as the path to prosperity, if not at the national level. And we talked about Tripura, for example, being engaged as a state with Bangladesh, but at least states around Bangladesh, Nepal, UP, Bihar, Himachal, all these other states. So how is it that SARC, I understand the Pakistan factor? What I do not understand, I mean, what I understand actually, but it could be because India is the dominant state in the region, wants to set the terms and conditions for engagement, not just political but also economic. So the rise of China, I mean, or China's increasing presence in South Asia means that these smaller states can play India and China. I mean, can use that to your advantage. Just as at the international level, India or Pakistan have used the great powers, one way or the other. Closer to the Soviet Union, more trade now with the United States and so on and so forth. But Rosecrans's idea, when extended, was basically about how trading states would not go to war. When they would have these little wars, as China and the United States do, they come to the brink of war and not actually go to war, because the losses for both sides would be immense. I mean, it would interrupt trade, and that would mean interrupting prosperity. And the idea was to become prosperous after all. So I think the point I'm making is there greater awareness among all these states, among policymakers in these states, and many of them are now educated abroad, bringing back the same kind of things that they have learned, which is that engaging each other in trade is good for everyone. That's one. But the second thing is smaller states need trade much more than larger states do. Now, a state like India has greater access to markets. We are not talking about multinationals coming in, but also the Indian industries, manufacturing, the IT sector, etc. So that's one. For smaller states, is it that Nepal or Bhutan or Bangladesh are consciously thinking along those lines, that we are small states, we really need to trade? And for Bangladesh, certainly trade is becoming bigger by the day. But the other thing that came to mind is that if physical trade is not the only aspect of trade these days, then when you think of trade between India and its neighbors, beyond physical trade, what kind of trade is taking place?
Say that last
Beyond
one.
physical trade,
Trade.
that is goods and services. I mean, goods, physical goods that are, bought and sold, as compared to, say, services. So, for example, the rise of global capability centers in India. I mean, you have every year hundreds of them setting up shop in Hyderabad or Bangalore, but that's for, the Western market. Now, these smaller states or the South Asian region, by and large, are not at that state of development, for want of a better term. So the trade that takes place between them has to be physical in nature, right? Is primarily physical, is of physical goods.
No, it's also increasingly services, like tech, fintech, edutech.
Okay.
I mean, these are not physical movements across on trucks and railway carriages and barges and freighters, and these are happening with technology, with things that are happening. There is know-how that is coming, and there's a lot of interaction that is happening between know-how, for instance. A small example, though it's sort of a physical movement, Sri Lanka's economy went into a bit of a tailspin, and ever since the days of the Civil War. So I'm talking about a situation from the 2000s onwards. Sri Lankan garment exporters. Sri Lanka was a garment export engine for a while, and Sri Lanka was also a sort of a small manufacturing engine, and it was also very, very well known, and it still is, for its ceramics and China. So Bangladesh has a vast number of Sri Lankan engineer, technologists, and garment export specialists. So essentially, the people who ignited Bangladesh's garment export industry, there was a lot of help that Bangladesh got from Sri Lankan garment specialists, and Sri Lankan ceramic specialists, and China specialists, and so on and so forth. There's a direct flight. There are 2 flights a day between Colombo and Dhaka, and it's full. People don't see that there are Sri Lankan restaurants in Dhaka, Sri Lankan owned restaurants in Dhaka, so on and so forth. I'm giving you tiny examples since you said that it needs to be physical. But yes, it needs to be physical, but there are other, I mean, they can be sort of hybrid physical as well. Indians are looking to, people in Bangladesh and Nepal are looking to Indian angel investors in their technology sector, right? Because Silicon Valley is tough to reach to, and now Indian angels have come of age, if you will. So there's a lot of traffic, and I use traffic just as a figure of speech, of people looking to India, and Indians going to Bangladesh to get the services sector going, to get the technology interactions going. I met somebody coming into Goa, a person who has just sold a software deal with the Chittagong Stock Exchange, a Delhi-based organization, which had just had a board meeting with the Chittagong Stock Exchange board in Dhaka. We flew back together and we were talking. So things are happening. Yes, it's physical to a great extent because that is the core of the trade, that is the bulk of the trade. But how do you define it? Is electricity physical? It's, to me, it's what is tradable. Goods, services, technology, ideas for a tradable thing. I tend to look at trade in a far more sort of a 360-degree way, and I couldn't argue with you about Mr. Rosencrantz because the only one that I know has an E in it, and that's Mr. Rosencrantz, because I'm also a literature person. So I'll stop there.
So, just adding to this discussion, suppose how do you see that education kind of thing, like opting to study in Indian universities and institutes? How do you see this kind of exchange increasing in coming days? Just adding to this.
I think so, because there are, and this is a sort of a corollary to other things. things that are happening. For instance, Indian hospitals like Apollo, Fortis are now setting up shop in Bangladesh. There are Indian providers in Bangladesh right now, and Bangladesh is welcoming. There are what a lot of the. So I'm just setting this up as a base. So I think it happened, and a lot of Bangladeshis come to India, and even the snobbish Bangladeshis who would rather go to Singapore and Bangkok for their medical treatment are now looking at India as well. And the same way that Indian students have been looking at Central Asia and South Asian countries as educational places where they can go and study because it's frankly cheaper or more convenient. I think right now, and Professor Rahman alluded to this, and Professor Parulekar also alluded to this, that we need to be looking at more awareness needs to rise. So right now in Bangladesh, largely, again, it's a sort of a Western orientation that when you look at education or higher education, you look to Europe or North America, and increasingly Southeast Asia. So Malaysia and Indonesia have become hot destinations for Bangladeshi students. ULAB itself, my university, has about 5 MOUs with universities in Malaysia and Indonesia. I sometimes ask what for, but it evidently seems to work. And I think the next logical step is Sri Lanka, India, over time, maybe the University of Peradeniya and Kandy, who knows where we can go with this. It's when the demand becomes so overwhelming and the need for Bangladesh's engine of growth becomes imperative. I think the same way Indians have looked for opportunities in the world, Bangladeshis will too. And then I think very soon, sooner than later, India will be a logical geography destination for Bangladeshi students, but we need to be attractive to them. We need to make it easier for the students to come. We don't need to be arrogant about it. And that's also not necessarily because we can't be America, we can't be European Union. We need to be neighborhood first. So I think we need to reach out from India and to make the environment more salutary so that people from countries like Bangladesh and Nepal and Bhutan and Sri Lanka come to India. We need to make it worth their while in every way, visa downwards.
Are there,
Professor
Parulekar?
Gone on a bit, but
yeah. So my first comment was a comment and a question both together. Is that can we really compare with ASEAN and Europe, given that India is kind of like the giant in the region, and therefore, if you were to look at from India's perspective as a trading partner, in the top 10 trading partners, none of the neighboring countries feature, probably because of size. But when I look at each of the neighboring countries, I'm keeping Pakistan excluded. If I look at Bangladesh and Nepal and Sri Lanka, India would be in the top 3 trading partners, right?
Absolutely.
And maybe it's so that's one I wanted to comment on that. And the second question I had was, what's the impact of the Ukraine-Russian conflict and Israel-Palestine on the relationships within the region, between the countries within the region? Because I'm just thinking about in Europe, for example, with Hungary suddenly Orban being pro-Russian, it has some impact on the way that rest of Europe looks at most of Europe is NATO, and therefore there is kind of concerted common action as far as both of these conflicts are concerned. India and China, both the biggies in the region, they've largely kind of remained on the sidelines. So has that impacted the relationships?
For your first point, I'm completely in agreement, and I think the point that you were trying to make is that as the trade shows that India remains in the top 3, so also in future, if India is attractive for educational services and similar services, it will also become attractive to students from Bangladesh and so on and so forth. That's logical, and that's, I think, will happen, provided India is attractive, is made attractive. And Indian educational institutions are frequently in Bangladesh to attend education fairs. I see this happening. I've been in Bangladesh as teaching in this university for the past 2.5 years. And I've seen every year between 3 to 4 education fairs, which are heavily attended by not just Indian colleges, but also Indian schools, boarding schools, residential schools in particular. So I think that has become an outreach as well. As to your other point, I think the countries of South Asia, in terms of both Russia and Ukraine, and also Israel and Palestine, have essentially taken a very practical stance, the same way that Indian oil imports from Russia suddenly zoomed up because India was recycling oil on behalf of Russia and sending it energy across to the European Union, and everyone was okay with it. And I remember the foreign minister, Mr. Jaishankar, being asked about this in the West, and he was upfront about it. And I think another minister, Hardeep Puri, was upfront about it as well, saying this is a practical world. We need to do this in order to do what we need to do. So India suddenly, Russia became, besides Qatar, the single largest energy source for India for reasons that we know. I see in Bangladesh, for instance, Nepal, Bhutan, and all, but a practical engagement with both Russia and Ukraine and Israel and Palestine. For instance, Bangladesh is very charged about Palestine, and it has taken Israel to court along with South Africa to the International Court of Justice. Let's not forget this. Equally, while that happens, it is negotiating with Israel's biggest ally, the United States, for issues related to Bangladesh's national interest. So it hasn't derailed. So countries go with national interests. So countries are naturally selective about what they need to do. Another example about Russia and Ukraine, specifically about Bangladesh, forget India for now. Russia is setting up a nuclear power plant in Bangladesh, in Western Bangladesh, in a place called Rupur, which is actually a bit of a clone of the plant that Rosatom set up for India in Kudankulam, in Tamil Nadu, near Thoothukudi. So it is the same organization. There was and in fact, Russians are all over Bangladesh right now because of Rupur. The same way that during India's industrialization, you had a lot of Russians. There was a Russian ship bringing in pipes and other material and boilers and all sorts of things for the Rupur nuclear power plant. And the US flagged Bangladesh saying, you know, some of the ships carrying it are embargoed and they're not supposed to be part of it. So Bangladesh told Russia, sorry, but you know, just use another ship. And it was fine. And Russian material continues to come into Bangladesh using non-sanctioned shipping. It's fine. Russian nuclear fuel will be arriving in Bangladesh shortly, even as Bangladesh is negotiating with General Electric and Westinghouse and many other companies to set up thermal power plants not too far from Rupur, and also with NTPC and other places. So I think countries play their chess moves according to their particular national interest, and increasingly it is becoming so. So I think that speaks well for sub-regionalism as well, because people will override the India-Pakistan poison, for instance, to play what works for them. So it's all about what works to minimize what is not working. That's how it works. So I hope I've been able to partly answer your question.
Is there any? There is.
Wow.
I will come to you. I will come to you. There is a question from the back.
Hi, Vensi here. So you talked about development and the idea of development, and again you spoke about B2B and G2G. What I find missing is the P2P, the people. Okay, because when we look at India, Bangladesh especially, these are nations which have extreme inequality and percentages of growth, where there's inequitability of wealth and the sharing of wealth across both the nations. Again, both nations are extremely high in poverty levels, and poverty created and constructed by displacement. Again, both these nations have extremely high corruption indexes. And again, its impact is on labor and the labor politics. Now, we talked about SARC, we talked about BIMTech and all of those. What I would also like to understand is how do you see the impact of BRICS? Because I, again, missed BRICS and the emergence of BRICS, especially in terms of financing within the Northeast region of India, Bangladesh, BRICS, Brazil, India, Russia.
I know what okay. I know what it is.
Because again, BRICS is now funding in terms of hydroelectricity within Bangladesh. And again, BRICS consists of both India and China, you know, in that sense, because you were talking about water earlier. Again, when you talk about this region, what I would like to hear more about is about Thailand, because again, between India and Thailand, they kind of form a pincer and create a kind of a blockade with China on the other side in terms of trade for these smaller nations.
Which comic book have you been reading?
I'm not reading comic books. This is just
no,
how you turn the,
No,
if you were to turn the globe upside down and you have the North Pole on the top, then you see the large valley.
No, I'm being facetious deliberately because I think I want to reply to what you're saying. But the last point is what I took exception to. My sincere apologies for intervening. I shouldn't have. Please continue.
So that's one aspect of it. And finally, when we talk about trade, how do you see intellectual property rights emerge now in the future? Because we no longer, again, while we have material trade that we're talking about, now trade has become more intellectual. And how do you see cooperation within a global South? And I'm not looking at just SARC, I'm looking at a global South of how intellectual property rights move within the global South, because again, knowledge lies within the commons and with people systems, with intangible cultural heritage. Again, Dhaka being a capital of culture, you know, Tagore later comes about and creates, when you have the partition and creates Shanti Niketan, you know, there's a history. So my question is, how then do we look at intellectual property rights within the global South? How do you see this relationship between India and Bangladesh, where you have such high levels of inequality, corruption, and labor, you know, construction of forced labor?
I hear you. Since you mentioned Mr. Tagore, or Mr. Thakur as we call him, like to call him, a quick correction on that note is that Shantiniketan was established before partition, right? And Mr. Thakur or Mr. Tagore didn't actually come back from Bangladesh to set it up. His headquarters, if you will, the family home, was in Kolkata, right? So he just had a zamindari, which is today in the eastern part of Bengal. So it's a quick course correction there. I can't resist it because I'm Bengali, so I assume for all Bengalis the scope. No. It was not a counter to anyway. No, we'll get into another sideshow here, so I'll resist. But can I respectfully say that that's incorrect, that assumption? I'm happy to talk to you about it after. In terms of people to people, I think the people to people, I did mention it, but I didn't go into it because the negotiations, the trading, yes, South Asia has some of the densest concentrations of poor people in the world. There's no doubt about that, right? But do you now, and I'm being deliberately facetious here, but I want to make a point, okay? Is that do poor people of Bangladesh now come over and build bridges with the poor people of India? Let me be facetious for a moment. In order to build this sort of pan-Asian, pan-South collaboration of resistance and push back against the B2B and the G2G, all right? Because you use this poor people. And here, I assume that you're, you know, sort of the D2D, the development to development sector speaks here, yeah? Which presumes to speak the same way that the government presume to speak on behalf of the citizens. I think the development sector also sometimes presumes to speak on behalf of the citizens, even though it has its heart in the right place. Who does the negotiations? Now, the NGO sector, the development sector, who represent the poor people and are doing a lot for the poor people, the same as the governments claim to represent them, right? And the people who are supposed to govern them. Who does the negotiation? The NGOs have increasingly a robust network within, I'm not going to the global South. I'm not going in there. I'm avoiding that deliberately because it's a whole different dimension. Let's stick to our little patch of the world, which has 1.7 billion people. It's plenty big. It's plenty big. We don't need to, we are the global south. We are majority of the global south. So we can speak, So I think there is a lot of increasing partnerships and interactions, which you would know to be very, very robust, increasingly more robust within South Asia, in terms of poverty alleviation programs, in terms of water, in terms of climate crisis mitigation, in terms of agricultural practices, in terms of sharing even things like media outreach to give people in the villages and the so-called disenfranchised a voice. In all these areas, there is a lot of collaboration that is taking place. And there are Dhaka, Kathmandu, these have become sort of hubs for developing these, for these ongoing dialogues. Sundarbans, Bangladesh and Indian development sector and NGOs and CSOs are working very closely to, because I see them in my university at the Center for Sustainable Development, working very closely to see what they can do with the Sundarbans. So I think things are beginning to happen, but let's not dismiss the government to government and the B2B as much as I'm a bit of a Bolshi, and I say this myself, because it has huge utility. Who does the treaty negotiations? For P2P, who will sit across the table and do the negotiating for the brass tacks and the nuts and bolts, which will ratify deals, which will ratify treaties, which will enable the P2P to move, even if it's for visas, for medical treatment, for education, for exchange of opinions or views, or even D2D to travel to each other's countries, needs a G2G interface for it all to work. I think we are missing the wood for the trees here, sir, in my opinion. I think we are not, the minute we sort of isolate ourselves into these silos, saying we, NGO to NGO works best, B2B works best, G2G works best, and G doesn't talk to B, doesn't talk to NGO, and doesn't talk to P. And I think that's where the disconnects begin to happen. So maybe let me be a flagrant idealist here and push to the interconnectedness of things. And I'm maybe sounding like a raving lunatic as I say this, but it's the only way the future can work, is when we break through the silos and the government talk to business more, businesses talk to NGOs more, which they're beginning to do in certain areas, in certain instances. And the people are beginning to get some more voice into decision-making beyond just the act of voting. So I think this is spreading, and I don't want to carry on because we are way past
before
the time.
I come to you, there is a hand raised long back from the online. I just I take that first, and then Mr. Professor Giri, you can unmute yourself and ask your questions. Professor Giri, if you can hear me. Professor Giri, if you can hear me, unmute yourself.
Yes, yes.
Yes, please.
So thank you, Sudeep. I am Ananta Giri from the Madras Institute of Development Studies. I have heard you in the literature festivals. So enriching, I would just like to add that in your spirit of interconnectedness, also the crucial significance of travel, translation, and literature. For example, these economic relationships between Tripura and Bangladesh, how it can be further enriched by thinking of Bangladesh Tripura Literature Festival, People's Festival, translation. This is number one. Secondly, the thing is that what each one of us could initiate for much more regional sense of co-presence, like the university in Bangladesh, what proactively it could do to have Indian students and scholars from Nepal. Of course, the energy is limited, but we need this kind of experimental spaces, because the kind of South Asian university we have in Delhi, like the SARC could not take its wing much. The South Asian university also has not taken its wing much. So these are my two reflections, please.
If you can briefly answer.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. There is quite a lot of activity between Bangladesh and sort of culturally speaking and literary, speaking in a literary sense, specifically in terms of translations between Bangladesh and say Bengal and Tripura. But largely it's a translation of intention, because these are also largely Bengali speaking areas, and the Tripura is now, unfortunately, because of historical reasons, has become a Bengali majority state. So I think the Tripura Bangladesh thing is not a factor right now. I mean, people are able to understand each other's languages and read each other's books. What has happened is that there is cooperation in, I think what needs to happen is that there needs to be a lot more cooperation in this region, so that more translations happen from one language to another language and we get to read them. So, for instance, I teach South Asian literature, and thank you for mentioning that we met at literature festivals. I teach South Asian literature. I am so very often at a loose end, because I wish I had more Nepali writing that I could teach my Bengali students who are primarily bilingual in English and Bangla. They don't know Nepali, so they can't read them. I wish I could have more Assamese writing that my students could read, more Sinhala writing, more Tamil writing, more Bangla, more Gujarati writing, more, you name it, that my students could read. But we are hamstrung by the dependence on English being a via language, if you will, a via medium in this translation pursuit. So I think translation itself needs to be a lot more robust within India and certainly within the region. And we need to be encouraging other languages, so-called indigenous languages of the region, which exist in Nepal, which exist in Bangladesh, which most people don't realize, and so on and so forth. So I think educational institutions could definitely contribute to that. And I wish that institutions would offer more funding for it, because culturally, these are very, very important aspects.
Yes, sorry.
I'm so sorry.
Professor Chakravarti, my congratulations on your very enlightening talk. I really enjoyed it. I am Kamal Datta, Principal Chief Conservator of Forests of Goa. I am perhaps the only member of bureaucracy physically present here.
I stood up for you.
Yes, just coming to that. I was very happy with your encouraging words about the bureaucracy. And as a person belonging from Tripura, so I was also very happy as the thing that you said, very encouraging words about Tripura. My only two issues that I wanted to ask this: what in your mind, what do you think that what Tripura can do more in this South Asian trades, what they could have done more? And second thing, that you never spoke a word about this Myanmar in this trade negotiation. So what is your thought about the trade in Myanmar?
Okay. So I think what Tripura, it's something that I believe, thank you very much. And I'll again be brief. What I think Tripura can do more, and indeed I've been saying that all the states of northeastern India can do more, or far eastern India as I like to call them. Indeed, all of eastern India is to actually send out, like many European countries do, and in fact, like many states of America, or even states within the Staats, within which are the cities, but also the provinces, say, of Germany do, and Canada does. Like Ontario will send out a trade mission. Different states send out missions to various countries, aligning with the embassies or not, sometimes on their own. So I think India's dynamics permits it for these states, for Assam, Tripura, Meghalaya, Manipur, Nagaland, to actually reach out with their own programs and plans to Nepal, to Bhutan, to Bangladesh, to other countries, to Thailand, to Singapore, which have become these very, very important aspects. As to Myanmar, it didn't logically come into place because right now I can have another conversation entirely on Myanmar. Suffice to say that, as I said in Dhaka a few weeks ago, to a security at a security and conference of which had foreign policy people and security affairs people, is that all bets are off in Myanmar, and not just Chinese bets or Indian bets or Bangladeshi bets or American bets or ASEAN bets. Even Myanmar's bets are off in Myanmar, because the situation is so implosive and so fluid and so fractious and so fractured that we don't know what's going to happen. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Therefore, all the paper dreams of Asian Highway 1 and 2 are up in smoke because Asian Highways 1 and 2 go from Thailand through Myanmar into northeastern India, through Bangladesh into mainland India. It doesn't work without Myanmar because the transcontinental trade doesn't work in that particular way. Trade with Myanmar has come to a complete, near standstill, except for a few cases where in areas where Thailand, China, countries with great interest in Myanmar, have negotiated with both the ethnic armed organizations and the so-called People's Defense Forces and the Tatmadaw, or the army, to ensure that the gemstones reach out, to ensure the timber comes out, and to ensure that Chinese interests and Thai interests and Singaporean interests and Indian interests are protected to the extent possible. But it's very fluid. Everybody's talking to everybody. There are no guarantees in Myanmar. And in terms of look east and act east, Myanmar is out of the jigsaw right now because it's as if it's a black hole right now. Not at all.
So,
not at all. In terms of politics and in terms of business interests, absolutely not. We underestimate the influence of Thailand in Myanmar. We underestimate the influence of Singapore in Myanmar. No. India has an interest in Myanmar, especially with some of the northeastern states, which has borders with Myanmar. But as of now, India's main action, as it were, or future action, which is related to the Kaladan multimodal project and sort of Act East and so on and so forth, specifically through the Sitwe port, which is a crucial part of this multimodal deal, is inoperative because it's not working. Sitwe port is off, it's cut off. And India's out of the game in Sitwe. India's consulate in Sitwe is shut down right now. So India's withdrawn from Sitwe, but I understand that it's talking to several ethnic armed organizations as well, alongside the Tatmadaw, to recoup its interest. But we may be digressing.
Before we end, because we're running way beyond the time. So it's like one comment, very optimistic observation made by one online participant, Anil Jahuri. He made a observation that if you travel officially among SAARC countries, you don't need a visa. A SAARC sticker is pasted on your passport by your government, and each country allows this. I have availed this few times, he has commented, including going to Pakistan. Is it how far it is possible?
I can't speak for Pakistan, and I also don't think that, I don't know when this gentleman traveled, but I can assure you that if you have a Government of India sticker on your car, and if you try to crash the barrier, you will be stopped and you'll be apprehended. There are more diplomatic niceties to this. It's not just a sticker on the car that you need to carry, you need to have an official passport. That lets you do this. Primarily, the official passport lets you do this. And I haven't actually seen any Nepali car or Bhutanese car or whatever car sort of blithely crossing borders without any controls or without any care or worry. And I may add here that to stand up for Wensi at this point of time, that South Asian relations are not all about G2G. It has to work for business people. It has to work for people. And a stray example or two where friendly countries offer these facilities to each other's officials in any case, which is why you have an official passport. These facilities are not extended to businessmen or business persons. These facilities are not extended to people who are students or citizens or tourists. And other interested people. So I think we shouldn't,
I think
while it is a point of optimism, there's a long way to go.
Like Anil Jawri likes to make a comment. Mr. Jawri, you can unmute and talk.
Yeah, just wanted to clarify that it was a SAARC sticker on the passport. I didn't have an official passport, a normal, ordinary Indian passport. And it also is accepted in Pakistan. It's an arrangement among SAARC countries that you don't need a visa when you travel officially. It's not available for business. I traveled officially to Bangladesh, to Sri Lanka, to Pakistan 3 times. And I just needed to go to my government, get a sticker on my passport and walk in, and that was treated as a visa.
Yes, but you needed the passport.
Yeah, not official passport. Official passport is different, and I had a normal passport.
When did you do this? When did this happen, sir?
This is all till 2019 I have traveled.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Then I learn a new thing.
Yeah, that's one good thing about SAARC countries, that at least this much ease was built
wonderful.
into them.
And I wish with your blessings that we can extend it to other areas. We look forward
Sure,
to it.
yeah.
And I stand corrected, sir. Thank you for teaching me.
Many online participants thanked you for the insightful lecture, and one of our colleague, Professor Divya, said that it makes her look into the BBI and more closely. And there is another long questions from Amrita, but I will pass on to you later on because
I'd be happy
to
to
too
answer
late
any
now
questions.
to read out the question. So I will invite Crystal to read out a vote of thanks.
So it is my distinct honor and privilege to deliver the vote of thanks for today's insightful and engaging talk and discussion on great game to great goal on fast-tracking trade and connectivity in Eastern South Asia. First and foremost, I would like to extend a heartfelt gratitude to our keynote speaker, Professor Sudeep Chakravarti, Director of the Center for South Asian Studies at the University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh. Your profound knowledge and comprehensive analysis have provided us with a deeper understanding of complexities and opportunities in enhancing trade and connectivity in Eastern South Asia. Your insights will undoubtedly contribute significantly to our ongoing discourse and future initiatives in this critical area. We also acknowledge and thank Professor Imran Rahman, Vice Chancellor of the University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh, for your continued support and collaboration, which have been vital in facilitating such enriching academic exchanges. I would like to express our sincere appreciation to Professor Ajit Parulekar, the Director of the Goa Institute of Management. Your support and leadership have been instrumental in making this event possible. Your commitment to fostering academic discussions on pivotal issues is truly commendable. Special thanks are due to Professor Sebastian Morris, the Chair of the Center for Public Policy and Governance at the Goa Institute of Management, whose dedication and guidance ensured the smooth execution of today's event. Your efforts have been remarkable. We are grateful to Professor Kingshuk Sarkar, Associate Professor and the Chair for the General Management and Public Policy area, for your valuable contribution to academic rigor and intellectual development of today's discussion. Your perspectives have enriched our understanding significantly. A big thank you to Dr. Pushkar and his team at ICG for managing the logistics flawlessly and providing us with a comfortable and conducive environment for today's talk. Your efficiency and professionalism are deeply appreciated. Our appreciation extends to Ms. Bernice D'Souza, a Senior Research Associate at the Goa Institute of Management, whose diligent research and preparatory work played a crucial role in shaping today's session. Your hard work and meticulous attention to detail is greatly appreciated. I would also like to thank Mr. Pratik Kulkarni, Ms. Vivida Amonkar, along with our administrative and IT staff, Vaibhav, Vikesh, for their unwavering support. And also thank you to Victor and his team for the live streaming. Your dedication to ensuring that all technical aspects ran smoothly is greatly appreciated and crucial to the success of this event. A warm thank you to all the participants. Your active engagement, thought-provoking questions, and enthusiastic participation have made today's discussion vibrant and meaningful. Once again, thank you all.
Thank you, Crystal, for your contribution. You made a nice poster and all the efforts that you made. Thank you. Thank you.